Most people believe change begins with a feeling, a surge of energy, a spark of inspiration, a moment when the mind finally says, now. But this belief is a quiet trap. Motivation is not a foundation. It is weather. It arrives unexpectedly, burns briefly, and disappears without explanation. And when it fades, most lives return to waiting, waiting to feel ready again, waiting for the right mood, waiting for desire to reappear and carry what discipline refused to build. The Stoics saw through this illusion long before modern culture turned motivation into a commodity. They understood that a life dependent on feeling is a life governed by circumstance. And what is governed by circumstance cannot be stable. Epictetus warned that the untrained mind mistakes impulse for truth. Chrysippus taught that desire is reactive by nature, pulled toward what promises relief and pushed away from what demands effort. In both cases, the self is not leading. It is being led. Modern neuroscience confirms this with uncomfortable clarity. Motivation is chemically fragile. It rises with novelty, anticipation, and reward, then collapses as dopamine recalibrates. The brain adapts quickly. What once felt exciting becomes ordinary. What once energized becomes effort. This is why so many begin with intensity and end with exhaustion, why resolutions decay, why ambition stalls. Not because people lack desire, but because desire was never designed to sustain action. There is relief in recognizing this truth. You are not broken because you struggle to stay motivated. You are human, but relief quickly becomes responsibility. Because if motivation cannot be trusted, something else must carry the weight of action, something quieter, more durable, less emotional. The Stoics called this mastery, not dominance over others, not force applied through willpower, but command of the self that remains when emotion withdraws. The modern world tells you to wait until you feel like acting. Stoicism tells you to act so feeling becomes irrelevant. This is not harshness, it is clarity. When you stop waiting to feel ready, the pressure to perform disappears. Action no longer negotiates with mood. Progress no longer depends on excitement. And in that moment, a different question replaces the old one. If motivation fades, what remains to carry the self forward? Why wanting is not the same as being able. Desire feels convincing because it speaks loudly. It announces itself with emotion, with urgency, with the promise of change. Yet the Stoics treated desire with suspicion, not contempt, but clarity. Epictetus made a sharp distinction that modern culture often ignores. There is what we want, and there is what we can govern. Desire belongs to the first category. Ability belongs to the second. Wanting is reactive. It responds to mood, comfort, comparison, and circumstance. One day it burns with certainty. The next, it vanishes without apology. A life built on wanting inherits this instability. Chrysippus observed that desire does not arise from reason, but from impression. Something appears attractive or aversive, and the mind rushes to agree. In that agreement, authority is quietly surrendered. The self follows appetite instead of directing it. Modern motivational culture elevates desire as a starting point. Feel inspired first, then act. But this reverses the order of mastery. It places action downstream from emotion and emotion downstream from circumstance. Neuroscience explains why this arrangement collapses. Desire is fueled largely by dopamine, a chemical designed to pursue novelty and reward. Dopamine does not sustain effort. It initiates movement, then withdraws, as familiarity replaces excitement. What felt possible yesterday feels heavy today, not because the task changed, but because chemistry did. This creates a cycle many mistake for personal failure. Motivation surges, plans are made, identity expands briefly, then motivation falls, and with it, follow through. The mind interprets this as weakness of character when it is simply the nature of desire. The Stoics rejected this cycle entirely. They did not ask whether they felt like acting. They asked whether action aligned with reason. Musonius Rufus taught that the measure of progress is not intensity, but consistency. A single inspired effort proves nothing. What matters is what continues when enthusiasm fades. This is why desire cannot be a foundation. Foundations must endure pressure. Desire collapses under boredom, discomfort, and delay. Wanting is not the same as being able. Wanting imagines change. Ability executes it. The Stoic path begins when this distinction is accepted without resentment, when the self stops demanding emotional permission to act, when responsibility replaces appetite as the organizing force of life. This realization is uncomfortable at first. It removes the excuse of waiting. It strips away the fantasy that the right feeling will arrive and solve everything. But it also grants something rare: stability. If desire cannot be trusted, something else must take its place. Not force, not excitement, but command. And to understand why command is necessary, the chemistry behind inconsistency must be seen clearly. When dopamine leads, discipline disappears. Inconsistency is often judged as a moral failure, a lack of will, a weakness of character. But this judgment misunderstands the machinery beneath behavior. The Stoics would have recognized the error immediately. They did not condemn human instability, they diagnosed it. Epictetus taught that when the ruling faculty surrenders command, the self is dragged by whatever pulls hardest. In the modern nervous system, that force is often chemical. Dopamine is not the molecule of discipline, it is the molecule of pursuit. It rises with novelty, anticipation, and the promise of reward. It sharpens focus briefly, then recalibrates. What once felt urgent becomes ordinary. What once felt exciting demands escalation. This is not a flaw. It is how the brain protects itself from saturation. Andrew Huberman explains that dopamine is designed to initiate movement, not to sustain it. It gets you started. Then it steps back. When action depends on dopamine alone, behavior becomes erratic. Starts are frequent. Finishes are rare. This is why motivation-driven lives feel unstable. Action accelerates when chemistry cooperates and collapses when it does not. Mood becomes the gatekeeper of behavior, and mood, by nature, is unreliable. The Stoics would call this a failure of inner command, not because chemistry exists, but because it has been allowed to rule. When dopamine leads, discipline disappears because discipline requires continuity. It requires action in the absence of emotional reward. It requires the capacity to proceed when the body offers no encouragement. Modern culture trains the opposite pattern. Act when you feel energized. Stop when you feel resistance. Chase stimulation. Avoid discomfort. This training conditions the nervous system to associate effort with threat and boredom with danger. The brain learns that stillness is loss and that difficulty signals retreat. But Stoic discipline rewires this association. By acting without emotional negotiation, the brain learns a different lesson. Effort is survivable, discomfort is temporary, lack of motivation is not an emergency. Neurochemically, this matters. When action continues despite low dopamine, the brain adapts. Alternative systems engage. Serotonin stabilizes mood through coherence and status earned through consistency. Stress responses shorten. Recovery improves. Inconsistency, then, is not a personal flaw. It is untrained biology responding exactly as it has been taught. The Stoics never waited for chemistry to align. They aligned the self despite chemistry. This is why they valued practice over feeling, repetition over enthusiasm, and command over craving. They knew that what governs behavior is not what excites the mind, but what the self has learned to obey. If chemistry explains the problem, it does not absolve responsibility, it clarifies it. Because once the mechanism is understood, the solution becomes unavoidable. Mastery is not inspiration that lasts, it is authority that remains. And to understand what that authority truly means, mastery itself must be defined with precision. To rule the self without emotion's permission, mastery is often imagined as intensity, as force applied through will, as domination over weakness through effort. The Stoics rejected this image entirely. For them, mastery was not about overpowering emotion, but about removing its authority. Not suppression, but hierarchy. Not struggle, but order. Musonius Rufus taught that a person is not free when they do what they want, but when they are no longer compelled by what they feel. This distinction is subtle, and it changes everything. Wanting is easy, governing is rare. Marcus Aurelius returned to this idea repeatedly. In moments of exhaustion, frustration, and doubt, he did not ask how to feel better, he asked how to remain aligned. His writings reveal no dramatic attempts to summon motivation. Instead, they show quiet reminders of responsibility, proportion, and continuity. This is Stoic mastery. It is the ability to act without emotional permission. Modern psychology describes this capacity as emotional regulation. Daniel Goleman explains that emotional intelligence is not the absence of emotion, but the ability to keep emotion from hijacking behavior. When regulation is present, the prefrontal cortex maintains oversight. When it is absent, reaction replaces judgment. The Stoics understood this without neuroscience. They knew that emotion speaks loudly but briefly, while reason speaks quietly but consistently. Mastery is the decision to listen to the quieter voice. Cato the Younger embodied this principle with stark clarity. He did not act because he felt confident, hopeful, or inspired. He acted because the action aligned with his values. Even when the outcome was uncertain, even when the cost was personal, even when emotion offered every excuse to retreat. This is why mastery feels calm. There is no inner debate, no negotiation with mood, no waiting for readiness. Action becomes procedural rather than emotional. Neuroscientifically, this stability matters more than intensity. When behavior is governed by regulation instead of emotion, the nervous system experiences coherence. Stress does not disappear, but it no longer fragments identity. The brain recognizes continuity, and continuity reduces threat perception. This is why mastery is sustainable. It does not spike. It does not crash. It does not depend on novelty. The modern world sells motivation because it is visible. It looks powerful. It feels dramatic. Mastery is quieter and therefore overlooked. But mastery endures when motivation fails. The Stoics measured progress not by how strongly one felt, but by how reliably one acted. Not by passion, but by posture. Not by excitement, but by consistency. To rule the self without emotion's permission is not coldness. It is dignity. It is the refusal to let temporary states dictate permanent direction. It is the choice to remain intact when feeling withdraws. Yet mastery cannot remain theoretical. It cannot live only in understanding. The body must be trained to obey structure instead of mood. Because insight alone does not change behavior. Repetition does. And this is where mastery becomes embodied. Why habits obey structure, not inspiration. Understanding mastery changes nothing unless the body is taught to cooperate. The mind may agree, but behavior answers to something deeper. It answers to what has been repeated. This is where most people fail without realizing it. They attempt to govern action through insight, persuasion, or emotional intensity. They try to think their way into discipline. But the nervous system does not respond to arguments. It responds to patterns. The Stoics knew this with disarming clarity. They never confused knowledge with character. Zeno and Cleanthes taught that philosophy was not something to admire, but something to practice daily, precisely because repetition is what reshapes the self. A single correct thought changes nothing. 1,000 repeated actions change everything. Modern neuroscience gives language to this ancient realism. Habits are not moral achievements. They are neurological grooves. Each repeated action strengthens a pathway. Each avoided action weakens one. Joe Dispenza describes identity as a memory of repeated states, not a declaration of intention. You are what your nervous system expects you to be. This is why motivation fails as a strategy. Motivation is episodic. Habits are structural. When action depends on mood, behavior fluctuates. When action depends on structure, behavior stabilizes. The Stoics designed their lives accordingly. They removed decision-making where possible. They reduced negotiation with feeling. They acted at set times, under set conditions, regardless of emotional weather. This was not rigidity. It was conservation of agency. Every time a man waits to feel like acting, he trains the nervous system to associate action with permission. Every time he acts without that permission, he trains the nervous system to obey structure instead. Neuroplasticity responds to this distinction immediately. At first, resistance increases. The body protests. The mind produces excuses. This is not failure. It is rewiring in progress. Over time, the resistance weakens. What once required effort becomes neutral. What once felt heavy becomes procedural. This is the quiet power of mastery. It removes drama from action. Andrew Huberman explains that when behavior becomes consistent, dopamine stops being the driver and becomes a modulator. Action no longer depends on spikes of desire. It rests on baseline coherence. Serotonin stabilizes mood through earned self-trust. Stress responses shorten because the system recognizes predictability. The Stoics would call this freedom, not freedom from effort, but freedom from internal chaos. Training the self, not the mood, means designing life so that action is expected, not negotiated. It means reducing choice where choice invites avoidance. It means respecting the biology of habit rather than fighting it with inspiration. This is why mastery feels quiet. There is no inner argument, no waiting, no escalation of emotion. Action occurs because it is time for it to occur, and when behavior stabilizes this way, something deeper shifts. Identity no longer depends on intention, it reflects reliability. When the self becomes reliable, motivation becomes unnecessary, and this is where mastery reveals its final form: stillness as command. There comes a moment when something fundamental changes, not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. The man who no longer needs motivation does not feel different in the way people expect. He is not constantly energized. He is not emotionally charged. He is not driven by excitement or urgency. He is steady. The Stoics understood this state as the highest form of freedom. Seneca wrote that the greatest power is to remain consistent with oneself, not when circumstances are favorable, but when they are indifferent, hostile, or draining. This consistency is not stubbornness, it is coherence. Marcus Aurelius did not wait for inspiration to govern an empire. He did not wait to feel calm before acting with justice. He did not wait to feel strong before enduring hardship. He acted from alignment, not emotion. This is the man who no longer negotiates with his inner weather. Modern psychology describes this as emotional maturity. Daniel Goleman explains that emotional intelligence reaches its peak not when emotion is intense, but when it is integrated. When feeling is present but not decisive. When awareness exists without compulsion. Neuroscience reinforces this image with clarity. In a trained nervous system, action is no longer preceded by internal debate. The prefrontal cortex remains engaged. Stress responses rise, then fall quickly. The body recognizes continuity rather than threat. This is stillness as command. Not the stillness of withdrawal, but the stillness of authority. A calm that does not freeze action, but directs it. A quiet that does not avoid difficulty, but meets it without escalation. The man who no longer needs motivation does not ask how he feels before acting. He asks what must be done, and then he does it. This does not make life easy. It makes it navigable. Fear loses its influence here, not because danger disappears, but because danger no longer disrupts identity. The self is no longer renegotiated with every emotional shift. This is why mastery feels like relief. The exhausting cycle of waiting, hoping, and restarting ends. Life stops oscillating between intensity and collapse. The Stoics would say that this is when the ruling faculty has finally assumed its role. The self is no longer pulled forward by desire or pushed back by discomfort. It moves deliberately with proportion. From the outside, this man appears calm. From the inside, he is resolved. He does not chase motivation. He does not fear its absence. He does not depend on it. Motivation becomes irrelevant when structure is in place. Emotion becomes information, not instruction. Action becomes reliable. This is not heroism, it is maturity. And it is rare, because it requires accepting a truth most resist. That freedom is not doing what you feel like doing. It is doing what you have decided matters, regardless of feeling. The man who no longer needs motivation has already made that decision, long ago, quietly. And once made, it governs everything that follows, beyond motivation. Finally, what remains is not effort, but posture. When motivation is no longer required, life grows quieter, not because ambition has faded, but because friction has dissolved. The constant negotiation with feeling ends. The inner debate softens. The self stops asking permission to move. The Stoics understood this end point clearly. They did not chase enthusiasm. They cultivated reliability. They did not seek emotional intensity. They sought inner order. Beyond motivation lies mastery, a state where action does not depend on excitement, where discipline does not require force, where the mind no longer oscillates between desire and resistance. Modern life trains the opposite pattern. Feel first, act later, wait until the mood is right, hope that energy arrives before responsibility demands it. But mastery reverses this sequence. Action comes first, structure comes first, command comes first. Emotion follows, or it does not. Either way, the path remains intact. Neuroscientifically, this is coherence. The nervous system no longer spikes at every demand. Stress rises, then falls. Attention remains wide. Identity remains stable. Philosophically, this is freedom. Not freedom from obligation, but freedom from internal chaos. The self is no longer divided against itself. Desire no longer argues with reason. Mood no longer interrupts direction. This is why mastery feels calm. There is no need to convince oneself each morning. No need to manufacture urgency. No need to borrow energy from emotion. Life becomes navigable because it becomes predictable from within. Motivation fades. Mastery remains, not as intensity, not as excitement, but as quiet resolve, a steady hand on the inner helm, a mind that moves without drama, a self that does not wait to feel ready. The world may be loud, circumstances may shift, emotion may rise and fall, but the command remains. A pause, a breath, and then deliberate movement forward.